Hello, Year 12 students. So we are now going to look at the final section of part 3 in Ransom, and that is page 142 through to page 163. And my title for this section is Hermes. That's a bit of a spoiler alert for those people who haven't read it yet. The god Hermes, over the next 20 pages, plays a major role. Anyway, we'll start with our discussion at the top of 142. And so, just moving on, we notice it's interesting. The indications that there is a god presence start right from the beginning of this section. First, the owl announces Hermes' arrival. And there's a couple of times there's an owl hooting in this section. There's a silvery greyness that touches the river. Now, this could just be night, but it could also be the arrival of the god. And so this is still being told by Priam's perspective. They have to move on, that is, cross the river to get to the Greek camp. But it has been a significant interaction for him. Priam, in his mind, says he would remember all of this. And there's some of the details, the water on his feet, the fishes, etc. Okay, and 143. So Somax then coddles Priam like a child who is placid and biddable. So this is the third time this metaphor, the extended metaphor of Priam of being childlike, is reinforced. So he dries the foot, and at this point they notice a slim youth who is leaning in a leisurely manner against the wagon. And he's wearing a winged bonnet. That means a winged helmet, which, if you look up Greek mythology, is one of the images that are connected to Hermes. And 144. Priam feels anxious. His heart jumps. They notice how young this youth is. They describe him as an intruder, or Priam describes him as an intruder. We know it's from Priam's point of view because he's thinking of Somax as Idias. And Idias is preparing to charge, to fight against this young youth. And the youth starts conversation. He's saying, "What? You think that you can take me out? If I wanted to nab your treasure, yes, I could have walked away with anything I fancied in this half an hour that you've been dabbling your toes in the stream." So Priam notices that he's an angry boy, but this one was play acting, who actually wasn't angry at all. He had bluster that was like a youth who liked to hear his own voice. But maybe he's also dangerous, it says. And then the youth continues and says, "Well, you're probably wary of me," or wary is like aware, concerned, worried about me because I'm a Greek. You've heard what ruffians we are, what barbarians. Am I a barbarian? And at the bottom of here, I think this is 146, he says, "Well, actually, I've been sent to be your escort." And he's being quite chivalrous, gentlemanlike. And he introduces himself as Orchilus. Okay, so not as Hermes. He says that he's one of Lord Achilles' men, one of his myrmidons, and he creates the whole backstory. that there is 7 of them, 7 sons, perhaps trying to create a connection because only 4 are still living, and both of the Priam and Somax have lost children. And then he announces that there's no reason to be worried for your lives or your treasure. I am your escort, sent by the Lord Achilles, who knows who you are, to protect you, he says. So he claims to be from Achilles. Priam thinks that this seems strange. He acknowledges the explanation, but is unconvinced. Something more is going on, he kind of realizes. Somax is even more suspicious. And Priam is acting in a way that's kind of protective here. He's trying to protect Somax because he fears the youth might too perceive it. So then he kind of overacts here, it looks like anyway. The Lord Achilles, in his great courtesy, has sent one of his squires to be our guide. And then Somax tries to argue with him. My lord, so Priam thinks about the fact that Somax had punched his son and then regretted it, and he's concerned for this young kid, but he's also concerned that the carter may take matters into his own hands. Meanwhile, the youth, the guest, is lounging against the cart. Somax isn't so easily teased off. He's been called bumbling olds and bubbling oldster. And there's a sense that perhaps Somax feels responsible and protective also of the king. He allowed the king and the treasure and all that depended on it to fall into the hands of a dandified puppy. This is the youth, who actually is clearly a tough. He tells the youth that they don't need an escort and is mistrustful. He's trying to shake this fellow off. The first chance that we get, he's going to lead us into a ravine and our throats will be cut. He's going to betray us. And comment here, Priam distrusted charm. He learnt that lesson from his son Paris, which we know Paris from the story of the Trojan horse. For those of you who have seen Troy, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it as just context and background for this story here. But a sixth sense told Priam that in this case, something more might be involved than mere beauty. So he's got a sixth sense that something's going on here. He notices an odd smell. It's an unusual scent to the intruder's presence, a fragrance of a kind that Priam has never till now encountered. He says it describes it as some sort of aromatic oil. Notice this sensory imagery here. The presence of the god is being equated to an unusual scent, and he says there is an intoxicating effect of it. It's not unpleasant, like a yielding of his senses. Okay. And the youth calls him father, and a number of times he addresses him as father, which is quite significant because Priam is playing a symbolic role in approaching Achilles in his role not as king but of father. So Priam allows himself to be drawn up into the cart, and they plan to actually cross the river, the Scamander River. Somax is quite proud. Doesn't need help. The youth addresses Beauty, the mule, and calls him little sister. Sorry, calls Beauty little sister. Somax, we're jumping here to Somax's perspective, remarks, oh, little sister, is it? He's furious and jealous. His favourite, Beauty, had so immediately succumbed to the empty fellow's charms. Okay, he's like been betrayed by his mule to this young youth, and they've now come to the water's edge. They're on the cart now, and they've moved to the water's edge. And there is a description of them edging forward. The mule's uncomfortable because the water is now rolling. Okay, it's deep water, this stream with its many eddies, eddies being like a wind, like a stream, like a current would be the good way. Okay, and their wheels are grinding against the pebbles, and at this point they get stuck, about to fall into the river. So the legs of the mule get caught with this force of the undercurrent, and the water is pushing them and is going to threatening to push them downstream. This whole outfit is about to be pitched into this flood. Okay, so Priam sees that Somax prepares to leap in and attempt, hopeless though it may seem, to set them right. But the little mule, they're saved by Beauty. The mule is more self-possessed than she appears. She steps up, she props up the wagon righted, and a minute again they were on firm gravel with the water running easily round and past them. I got a couple of videos because I thought to myself, yeah, what would it be like to try and cross this river? You see like the rushing river there and what it might be like. Can you imagine trying to step out into this with a horse and cart? So that is sort of the image that I had in my mind of this rushing river. And Escort, the youth, still retains his cheery good humour, and he finds a safe place. He wanders downstream. The driver, though, Somax, ignores him and wants to make his own decision. You see this sense of independence and pride in Somax. But eventually he actually, when he rolls, he actually finds his way back to where the youth was. So he actually acknowledges that he has chosen the best path. The second channel was deeper than the last one. Water is high and there's tumultuous eddies around the wheels. It's threatening to throw their cart off, and the youth says, wow, this is an adventure. You didn't expect this, did you? Priam thinks no, he hadn't, but he's actually enjoying it. He was hanging on to the crossbench, looking happily over the expanse of this water with its eddies and haphazard cross currents of light. But the bottom is solid. For all the swirling around them of the icy stream, there is something solid. I wonder if there's some intentional or unintentional symbolism there. Maybe the life, the swirling river of life, perhaps. Anyway, Beauty gives one last pull, and then the mules put their heads down, and all of a sudden they are on dry land again. And their escort wades ashore. His clothes are soaked, but not even a head of his hair was out of place. He's unflappable in a way. And there is a second hooting of an owl. And back here on 155, he praises beauty, Somax praises beauty and shock. Notice the moon was rising fast now, so it has changed to night. So remember, this started off in the middle of the day and they've ridden all day. They've stopped at dusk to have a break by the river, and now it's night time. Priam sits silent. The landscape they were entering was one of utter devastation. Now, I think this is possibly reflecting the impact of war. He notices the stars, Orion, the twins, and the Pleiades, which is interesting. There's symbolism there for Hermes as well, because he's represented as one of the, now Pleiades, it depends where you're from, whether you would call it one or the other, but that's another congregation. And the youth, their escort, starts chattering again. 156 we are. And at this point, we find out that there is something very special or very different about him. He actually announces to the carter, "That pretty daughter-in-law of yours, how is she? She's still troubled by her limp." So we and Somax and Priam possibly are wondering, how does he know this? The only way he can know this is that perhaps there is something divine about him. The carter hides his astonishment. But how else could this fellow know of her? He feels this pang of unease and a faint glimmering of something else. Priam is surprised also because the driver hadn't mentioned a limp. It wasn't part of his picture of the young woman. He had a picture of the young woman squatting beside these hot stones, flipping pancakes with the fingers, and if they're too hot, popping them into her mouth. But now he has to begin all over again in his mind, creating that image. He was glad to see here that he was pretty, but she has a limp. Okay. The youth says, "You are not pleased that I know so much about you, but I know more than that, a lot more. I know you've got a temper, that you're a rogue, that you're not too particular about the law, and you're fond of the tavern, you like to drink, bit of a tippler, storyteller, and a spinner of tales." He's sorry that the carter is sorry that the king has to hear such low gossip about him. He's thinking he could have knocked the young lad to the ground, but something restrained him. Some inkling that not all here is quite as it seems, that he's better to hold back. So the youth then... Okay, and so the youth continues and if we turn on to the next page, Somax whispers to Priam that this fellow, he's wearing a Greek bonnet, a Greek helmet, he's dressed like a Greek, but I wonder if he is Greek, or even a man like the rest of us. He's speaking under his breath. He's whispering. "What's that, old fellow?" the youth demands. "You think I'm not a man like the rest of you? What is it then? Who am I?" And Priam is the one who notices. It is my lord Hermes. And I would suggest it's worth pausing and having a look at legends of Hermes. He is a herald of the gods, a messenger of the gods, a protector of human heralds, travelers. So if you just Google him, I think that might help you with your understanding of the text. And here in this text, he is described as a celestial joker. So celestial meaning heavenly joker, messenger, thief, trickster, an escort of souls to the underworld, like the Grim Reaper, who comes to basically take people to heaven or hell, perhaps. So if he really was that, where were they heading? Had they drowned? Are they dead already? Are they on their way to the afterlife? Well, it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't smell like it. And Hermes then says, well, I see you're amazed. I was sent. This is true, but not by Achilles. He knows nothing of you coming. I was sent. Now they have a look of alarm between Somax and Priam, probably because they think he's normally sent to be the Grim Reaper and escort them to the underworld, but not for the normal reasons, not on this occasion. The next time you see me will be a different story. Then I'll be escorting you to your death. And Hermes announces, by the way, I'm invisible to everybody else, but you can both see me. But that little girl that you've been so concerned about, your granddaughter, remember she had a fever this morning, she's sitting up and she's having a bowl of barley porridge. She's asking where you are. Now, father, addressing Priam as father, the time has come to gather your strength. The Greek trench is just beyond here. We're almost there. Okay. Now, one thing I put in my annotations, but I haven't spoken about so far, is the fact that the gods have sent Hermes here, perhaps indicates this divine approval for their mission, which might tie into some of your notes on the theme of free will versus destiny. Anyway, so Priam finds himself at the limit of his strength. Remember, he's an older man. He's suddenly overcome. And he realizes that what he's planned about, now he actually has to do it. What has been in the realm of thought now has to be in the realm of action. He's finding his eyelids droop. He gets strengthened by the fact that he's a good Idios. Still doesn't know his name is Somax. He's not intimidated by the escort. He's acting like it's quite ordinary for a god to appear. And maybe Somax is just having bravado. He's faking it, perhaps. But it works. He also takes comfort, Priam takes comfort from the title of father. The youth has addressed him as father, and Priam thought it was just playful teasing, but now he recognizes that he is about to do a play where he's to represent the father in a way that has never been attempted before. And so the symbolism of this name of father that has been appointed to, given that he's going to take this unprecedented action, he is moved by this invocation of a sacred tie and takes it from the god's lips as an endorsement and blessing. So there it is, this idea that perhaps their action here is predestined or has the blessing of the gods. Or free will with the god's blessing. I don't know. Honestly, you start getting too much into over-analyzing free will versus destiny. Even in this text, it will kind of drive you nuts. But anyway, Hermes clasps his wrists, holds his hand, and then energy floods him, which I think is Hermes giving him divine strength. So they arrive at the trench between the Greek, that separates the Greek camp from the, I believe, the Trojan land. And beyond it, there is a 12-foot high gate to the camp. And 3 men are needed to raise the gate, and only Achilles can manage it. And we step this last section here. There's a company of Argives, who are just Greeks from Argos, on duty. And they are, so this next section is from the perspective of the Greeks inside the camp. So they're inside the camp, and there's this sudden knocking at the gate. The guard is quite surprised. There's been no signal that strangers have approaching the camp. There's suddenly a knocking of the door, and Then the massive pole, that one that takes 3 men to lift, has been moved as if by some invisible agency, and it opened basically on its own. And the captain of the Greek guard are standing there, they're spellbound, their hands are on half-drawn swords, and in comes a covered wagon, driven by 2 black mules with 2 old men seated beside them, seated side by side. And only when it had lurched and rumbled on into the camp, the leaves of the great gate had closed behind it, the bar once again, as if moved by invisible hands, had dropped with a thud, did each man give voice to their consternation, each man doubting what he had seen. Did that really even happen? Did that gate open on its own? Did these people come in? It was like they were thinking they were seeing something. And so that is the end of part 3.